He heard about the idea early, too early. It sounded odd, unrefined, a little too out there to take seriously. He nodded politely, moved on, focused on what made sense, what was proven, what was safe. 6 months later, the same idea was making headlines. 12 months later, competitors were adopting it. 18 months later, it was redefining the entire industry. And all he could think was, I saw it. I heard it. Why didn't I move? Because spotting disruption isn't about being smarter, it's about being open, curious, sharp enough to see the spark when it's still smoke. Most people miss it, not because it's hidden, but because it doesn't look the way they expect it to. Disruption rarely enters with fanfare. It whispers, it glitches, it shows up disguised as a toy, a fad, a small anomaly. But to the right eyes, to those trained to see patterns in the noise, that spark is unmistakable. They don't wait for trends to be validated. They don't wait for proof in the data. They move when they sense potential. And that's why they lead the change, while everyone else plays catch up. So if you've ever felt that you missed the wave, that the opportunity slipped by you, it's not because you weren't capable, it's because no one taught you how to spot the spark before it turns into fire. That's what we're going to unlock today: how to sharpen your radar, widen your lens, and start seeing tomorrow before it becomes obvious to everyone else. We love the drama of disruption, the overnight success story, the sudden explosion of a new platform, a new company, a new product that came out of nowhere. But that's just the headline. Real disruption doesn't start with noise. It starts with a whisper. It starts quietly, unevenly, on the edges of industries where no one's paying attention. Because the earliest signals of disruption never look like game changers. They look like experiments. They look like niche communities. They look like broken ideas trying to solve broken problems. And if you wait until they're proven, you're already too late. Think about it. Airbnb started with air mattresses and strangers, completely irrational to hotel executives. Uber began with tech guys offering black car rides, dismissed as elitist nonsense. Bitcoin, a weird internet token no one outside of cryptography cared about, until suddenly everyone did. What all these had in common was this: at first, they didn't make sense until they changed everything. Because disruptive ideas rarely follow the path of logic, they follow the path of tension. Tension between what exists and what's missing. Tension between how people live and what they silently crave. Tension between how things work and how they should work. And those tensions don't scream, they flicker. But if you know how to spot them, you'll stop waiting for the next big thing to arrive. You'll see it as it's being born. So let go of the myth. The next disruption won't come with flashing lights. It won't land in your inbox with a case study. It will come disguised, small, unproven, inconvenient, and your job isn't to judge it. Your job is to notice it before it's too loud to ignore. Disruption may look chaotic from the outside, but underneath the surface, that there's a pattern. Every disruptive shift, no matter the industry, the geography, the time, leaves clues before it explodes. And the leaders who spot them early, they're not guessing, they're reading signals. Here's what those signals usually look like. First, underserved needs. Every breakthrough starts where someone's needs aren't being met. A frustration, an inefficiency, a silent pain point no one is solving properly. Disruptors don't wait for the masses to complain. They listen to the quiet frustration long before it becomes mainstream. Second, user hacks and workarounds. When customers start bending your product to use it differently, you're either in trouble or on the edge of something powerful. These hacks are often the earliest signs that the system no longer fits. And where there's a workaround, there's an opportunity. Third, cultural friction. When the way people live shifts faster than the solutions available, a gap opens. That gap is the breeding ground for disruption. Think of how remote work, climate anxiety, or even digital identity have sparked entire ecosystems of innovation. Fourth, emerging behavior at the edges. Look to the extremes. What young users are doing, what fringe communities are obsessed with, what's happening in spaces with less regulation and more experimentation. Those edges may look weird now until they don't, because today's fringe is tomorrow's default. These aren't trends, they're patterns, and the people who lead disruption don't wait for proof. They notice these signals early, they connect dots, others dismiss, and they move while the rest are still asking, is this real? Because disruption isn't about inventing something from nothing. It's about seeing what's already changing and building where others are still blind. Most people hear a new idea and instantly ask, is this valid? Does this make sense? Will this work? But disruptors think differently. They don't rush to judge. They're not obsessed with being right. They think like sensors, not like gatekeepers. Their first instinct isn't to evaluate, it's to absorb, to notice, to ask questions, to explore what others ignore, because the early signals of disruption don't arrive fully formed. They're messy, uncomfortable, counterintuitive, and if you're trained to filter them through logic too soon, you'll kill the idea before it has a chance to evolve. Here's the shift. Stop asking, is this right? Start asking, what could this become? The disruptor's mindset is exploratory, not defensive, not reactive, curious. When they hear something strange, they lean in. They don't shut it down, they dissect it. They don't ask, does it fit into the current system? They ask, what kind of system would make this powerful? This isn't being naive, it's being visionary. Because disruption doesn't need your approval, it needs your attention. So, if you want to spot the spark before anyone else, train your brain to pause the judgment reflex. Let the idea breathe. Let it contradict what you know. Let it feel awkward, because the more uncomfortable the idea feels today, the more likely it is to reshape tomorrow. Not because it's polished, but because you were wise enough to see the possibility inside the mess. If you want to spot the spark before anyone else, you can't rely on luck. You need tools, habits, mental filters that train your brain to see what others miss. Here's how real disruptors keep their radar sharp. First, immerse in weak signals. Don't just read business news. Study what's happening on the fringes: art, science, underground tech, niche subcultures. Follow what young users are obsessed with, what hackers are building, what creators are experimenting with before it hits the mainstream. Because the future doesn't announce itself, it leaks through early adopters. Second, use reverse mentoring. Talk to people younger than you, outside your industry, with a worldview completely different from yours. They'll point out blind spots you didn't know you had. They'll challenge your assumptions, and they'll introduce you to ideas that your current filter would normally block. Third, ask first principle questions. Instead of asking, how can we improve this? Ask a system to break the system down to its core truths. Then rebuild it without inherited assumptions. That's where disruptive ideas are born, not in better answers, but in better questions. Fourth, prototype thinking. Don't wait to be sure. Test small. Build quickly. Play with the spark without risking the house. Disruptors don't bet the farm, they build learning loops. Tiny experiments that validate the idea's edge before it becomes obvious. Fifth, keep a spark journal. Every time something catches your attention, even if it feels odd, write it down. Patterns emerge when you review your notes over time. Suddenly, what felt random becomes a signal. This isn't about predicting the future. It's about being present to the pieces of it that are already here and having the tools to notice when no one else does. Because once your radar sharpens, you stop being surprised by disruption. You start becoming the one who brings it. Sometimes, the biggest risk isn't missing the spark, It's being blind to the fact that you're missing it. And that blindness doesn't come from ignorance, it comes from habit, from success, from comfort. Here are the warning signs that you're filtering out the future instead of tuning into it. First, you catch yourself saying, "That's not how we do things." This phrase sounds like wisdom, but it's usually a defense mechanism, a way to protect the status quo at the expense of possibility. Second, you dismiss ideas because no one's asking for it. The greatest innovations didn't come from responding to demand, they came from solving needs people couldn't yet articulate. If you only act on what customers are explicitly requesting, you'll always be chasing, never leading. Third, you wait for data to confirm what instinct already told you. By the time the numbers validate the trend, the window to lead it is already closing. Leaders who create the wave act before the spreadsheet says yes. Fourth, you confuse complexity with depth. If you only respect ideas that sound sophisticated or technical, you'll miss the simple ones that quietly disrupt entire models. Big change often starts with deceptively small shifts. Fifth, you feel bored with your own industry. That's not a sign of stagnation. It's a signal that your vision is outgrowing the current rules, and your radar is trying to pull you towards something new. When these signs show up, don't panic. Get curious, because your blind spot today might be someone else's $1 billion breakthrough tomorrow. And the good news? You can reboot your lens. You can retrain your brain. You can choose to see again. But first, you have to admit that maybe, just maybe, the future isn't late. You're just not looking in the right direction. The spark is already out there, not in the headlines, not in the trends everyone's posting about, but in the friction, in the forgotten user, in the broken process, in the strange, awkward, underestimated corner of your world. The spark of disruption doesn't wait for permission, it waits for attention. And the leaders who rise, the ones who build what others can't imagine, are not the ones chasing what's obvious. They're the ones who train themselves to listen deeper, to notice the tension before it becomes demand, to build when others still need proof. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need to be first. You just need to see what others don't and act while they hesitate. Because disruption doesn't need validation, it needs vision. It needs a mind willing to look twice at what others ignore, a leader willing to say, "There's something here," even when there's no chart, no consensus, no applause. So here's the truth: the next big wave won't feel big at first. It will feel uncomfortable, unclear, too early. And that's your cue: not to wait, to lead, to build your lens, to trust your pattern recognition, to move before the world says it's safe. Because the future doesn't belong to those who follow it, it belongs to those who learn how to see it first.